All right, let's dive right into today's explainer. We are unpacking a truly profound, deeply personal essay by Denzel Kenobi. It's this incredibly compelling piece of writing that tackles systemic inequity, the hidden everyday costs of compliance, and the very real price of actually speaking out. Whether you're totally familiar with these kinds of social dynamics or you're just curious about how systems maintain their status quo, this piece breaks down the mechanics of acceptance and rejection in a way that is just so structured and frankly eye-opening. We're going to walk through Kenobi's key arguments step by step so we can understand exactly why he suggests that sometimes being hated isn't a failure at all. It can actually be a badge of honor. So the author kicks things off with some really striking imagery straight from the text, the furnace of adversity. He uses this visual to dig into an ancient biblical warning from Luke 6:26, which basically says, "Woe unto you when all men shall speak well of you." It's a pretty bold way to open, right? It lays down this historical and scriptural foundation to argue a really uncomfortable point. If you are pleasing absolutely everyone, it's highly unlikely that you're actually telling the truth.
Okay, part one, the conditional offer and the arithmetic of compliance.
To really grasp what's going on here, the author lays out this unspoken arrangement historically offered to young black men in America. The deal goes something like this: soften your edges, watch your tone, definitely don't make waves, and then doors will open for you. It was basically an arithmetic that an entire generation was raised on. As the essay points out, you literally had to be twice as good just to get a tie. But the catch? This required presenting white America with a highly acceptable exhibit. A polished, totally unthreatening version of a human being, rather than bringing your whole, complex self into the room. Now this is where it gets really interesting. Kenobi argues that this arrangement isn't actually true acceptance at all. Instead, he defines it as a lease. Think about that. It's conditional. It's revocable. And the rent? The rent is constantly due. You pay for this lease in the currency of your silence about the injustices around you. You pay for it with endless patience, and by putting on a performance of being perfectly at ease in rooms that were structurally built to be uneasy about you. Which brings us to part two, terminating the lease and the cost of truth. Because, right, a lease only lasts as long as you keep making the payments. So what happens on the day you stop paying that currency of silence? To ground this in reality, Kenobi shares his own timeline. He describes years of playing the good boy, paying that likability tax day in and day out. But then, in 2017, everything changed. He refused to quietly absorb an injustice. He actually named it out loud. And the immediate result? It sparked a long war filled with retaliation, filings, and hearings. He shows us just how incredibly fast naming an injustice leads to a total repossession of everything his years of likability had supposedly bought him.
And here is the absolute crucial takeaway for us. Playing by the rules, it doesn't save you when you finally decide to speak up. Despite having clean hands, despite having a totally spotless record of being agreeable, the second you refuse to be managed, the system completely ignores your past good behavior. That polite wrapping paper just comes right off, and the system starts treating you with honest hostility. Which perfectly illustrates the text's first really uncomfortable truth. Kenobi realizes that the hatred coming from a system that previously loved his silence, well, it's not a glitch, it's not a malfunction. It is the machine working exactly as it was designed to work. When you refuse to be managed, the system accurately flags you as a threat to its operating assumptions, and it responds accordingly. For the author, there was actually a strange kind of clarity in this. The ambiguous smiles were finally gone, completely replaced by totally honest hostility.
Moving on to part three, facing the two fires and taking heat from your own. Now, if it was just you against the system, that'd be a pretty simple story, right? Individual versus institution. But the essay takes a much deeper turn here, analyzing a second fire, the backlash that comes from one's own community. Kenobi breaks this down into four distinct sources. First, there's the fear of the rocked boat. People terrified your actions will collapse their own fragile ledge. Second, you become a mirror reflecting their own past compromises. Third, there's that deep historical fear of collective reprisal. And lastly, you have peers who use the system's voice to do its work for free, slapping labels on you like difficult or a troublemaker. By actually categorizing these, the author helps us understand the fire rather than just being blindly terrified of it. And just to prove that this dual-front backlash isn't some brand new modern problem, the essay points us back to ancient precedents. It looks at the biblical story of Joseph. Remember, Joseph wasn't initially thrown into a pit by the Egyptians. He was thrown into the pit by his own brothers, simply because his dreams indicted their arrangement. Egypt just ended up buying what his brothers were selling. Kenobi uses this to remind us that If you find yourself taking heat from the system and your own household, take a breath. You are walking on a very old, very established path.
All right, part 4, testing the badge, righteousness versus the counterfeit. So if everybody's mad at you, does that automatically mean you're a hero? Kenobi says, well, hold on a second, we've got to be really careful here. He claims that bearing all this hatred can absolutely be a badge of honor, but it requires some pretty rigorous self-testing. He draws a really vital distinction. Hatred by itself proves absolutely nothing. He warns us about a counterfeit badge. You know, the one worn by folks who mistake just being totally insufferable for being righteous. The true badge is only valid when the hatred is actively punishing your unbroken integrity, your refusal to settle, and the actual truth you spoke. He urges us to constantly test the pushback we get. If it's just punishing your pride, you need to repent of that. The furnace is meant to refine you, not flatter you. Finally, we arrive at part 5, the furnace of refinement and finding peace in the fire. This is where the whole argument really comes together. Kenobi doesn't sugarcoat how profoundly isolating it is to walk this path, but he pivots to address its ultimate spiritual and philosophical purpose. Anchoring his conclusion in Isaiah 48:10, he makes this incredible point. The peace you find on the other side of refusing to comply, it isn't found in the absence of the fire. The fire is still very much there. The peace actually comes from an unshakable knowledge of what the fire is ultimately for. I absolutely love how he frames this. The hatred, the adversity, they aren't punishments for standing up. Rather, they're an active assaying process. Just like testing metal, the furnace is there to test, prove, and refine the individual. It literally burns away the need for that conditional lease we talked about earlier. The fire is the exact process of being forged into something that the system can never, ever again repossess. To wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a massive perspective shift from the essay. If you happen to be standing in the heat of these two fires right now, if you're facing backlash from a system you challenged and dealing with friction from peers who compromised, consider this parting thought. You have not been rejected. You are being assayed. Hold the line, because the furnace is not where they discard the metal, it is where they find out it is gold. It really makes you evaluate the friction in your own life, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me as we unpacked this material. Keep questioning, keep refining, and I'll see you in the next one.